used to being cold. I know it was warm one day, long, long time ago. Maybe there's a road that's not this hard. I'd rather not say why I couldn't stay home.
I was in America and I read an article in something like the Ladies' Home Journal. I mean, it's one of these quite straight magazines, and it was about a Canadian group who decided to do something about violence against women. And I think it was in Toronto they started this refuge, a shelter called Interval House, on the basis that they would provide at least an interval for women who'd been subjected to this kind of abuse. And that struck me as it was a good idea.
What attending that workshop did for me was somehow enabling me to bring together ideas about feminism with a practical reality of doing something that would affect women's lives in a positive way.
We know better, and we're full of confidence and anger and optimism.
It really was trying to carve out the service from what it had been to what it was to become, and all the issues about women's right, the right to determine your own destiny and being non-directive, and all those kind of theories of working that have sustained all down through the decades were carved out of discussions that were rooted in feminism. In 1978 in Edinburgh there were 3. There was the original one in Broomhouse Medway. After lobbying and campaigning for years or whatever, the group was finally granted this refuge, and then nobody came, and I think it was 10 days, nobody had come, nobody had phoned up saying that they wanted a space, or that they had, there was a woman that they knew who needed the space, and they were beginning to wonder so maybe there wasn't any domestic violence in Edinburgh. And then a woman came, and I think she'd come from somewhere else. I mean, she'd come a long way to get to Edinburgh, and she came in, and that was it. As soon as the first people were in, it just went from strength to strength. And it was a ground floor flat, and on the other side of the close there were the parents of Les McEwen, who was one of the Bay City Rollers. This fixes it very particularly in a historical period. And so these poor women who'd experienced abuse and had to leave their partners and take their children, and were really doing something very pioneering in Scotland, had to, every time they went in and out the close, they had to run the gauntlet of these teenage girls with platform shoes and tartan scarves hanging about in case Les popped in to visit his mum and dad.
The first refuge that I went to, and I met Becky Dobash just outside of it, and it was Interval House in Glasgow. And I was born and raised in the Gorval, so I knew the area. But at that point in time, Interval House was a condemned building, and it was rat infested and all sorts of things. But so the conditions of the building were desperate, absolutely desperate.
There were more women who just wanted to talk. Now, we hadn't expected that. What we'd expected was for women to want refuge, only refuge, and they would come once and that would be it.
The idea was to run it on self-help lines and to try to foster a culture where the women who were in there would take responsibility for running the refuge, and the ones who had been in longer would take responsibility for some of the newer admissions, and to kind of provide a kind of feminist analysis of what had happened.
Well, I didn't know what to expect. I thought it'd be this big hostel, like everybody still does, you know, and of course it wasn't like that at all. It was just an ordinary house and a stair. And although I was at a different area for the town, I was at the other end of the town, I still was quite frightened being there. I still thought he was round every lamppost, and although you know it's no real, you know, it's very real. You do imagine he's everywhere, you know, and he knows where you are and stuff. But however, we went into refuge, and I mean, it wasn't. I think I was just so relieved that it wasn't this big hostel and that we had our own bedroom. Me and the kids shared a bedroom.
And the houses were absolutely horrific.
Really?
Yes, yes, yes. Well, they had no money, they had no funds. Everything was donated, everything was sold, everything was second hand. The houses were barely decorated.
But it was the support that was the main thing. They were just like me. That I could relate to them immediately, you know. I mean, they were all different, but there was that common thread, you know, running through everybody, and everybody you met was really nice, and they were so understanding, and it was the first place I'd ever, in all these years, that I felt I could be myself.
Some women thought, is this, you know, am I worth nothing better than somebody's rejected furniture and old blankets? But for so many women, it was just a chance to be safe.
It was decided that we wanted an independent, informal grouping of local groups throughout the country. The other option at that stage was to all come under the umbrella of Chiswick Women's Aid and Erin Pitsey. And she spoke at that conference, and that was definitely what she wanted to happen, but she wanted control over how local groups would function. She wanted things all done in a uniform manner, and it was obvious to virtually everybody there that that wasn't going to work because there were different circumstances in different areas, and we also wanted our autonomy, and we all had our own ideas about what would and wouldn't work. So we went away from that conference feeling that we needed a national coordinating body.
Two main aims were to link the local groups and be a support for new groups setting up. The three founding principles of Women's Aid in Scotland were collective working, no men in the group, and a feminist analysis.
There was a very strong idea in Women's Aid that we should be organised in a way that didn't replicate the hierarchical structures that caused domestic abuse.
The first time I attended a collective meeting, well, it was like, what is this language they're talking? Is it German? And I mean, I had not a clue what people were talking about, and everybody seemed to know everything else, and I was sitting there thinking, oh my God. So that was hard. That was hard because I'd never ever been put in that position. I'd never ever worked like that before. So that took a fair wee while to sink in, to know that I had that responsibility.
Most women were coming with children, virtually all the women were coming with children, so it wasn't that we didn't have a connection with children. And some of these children would have issues that would clearly need to be addressed in some way. So, you know, I wouldn't like to give the impression that we just didn't think about children at all, but we thought about them in as much as they were in our care, and you know, some of them would have particular needs, and we tried to make their stay in refuge, you know, as fun and pleasant as it could be. But we didn't really have much understanding of the effect on children.
We tried to do stuff with them, and yeah, there was a very conscious thought about the kids all the way through. But we weren't able to, I mean, we didn't have enough money to pay people to do it.
people assumed, well, that we hated men, of course, and that we really wanted to break up the family, ruin men's lives in particular, of course, by taking away their wives, but you know, just ruin it all. We were out to turn women against men.
I also spoke to someone else in the social work department who was a very traditional man who just thought this was a bizarre project and obviously could not understand why it was getting support from the social work department.
Sue had burning paper put through a letterbox. I didn't. We were, not at this point, but later on, rung up in the middle of the night by angry neighbours.
We tried to get a new refuge in Skin Flats, and I mean, I was involved in that, and that was horrendous. I mean, we had huge public outcry there, and we had a big public meeting, and you know, everybody stood up and sort of said, you know, why the community should accept this, and there was just immense hostility.
The uniqueness of every woman's story, but we also wanted to build up a consistent picture by asking them, asking all women about the different incidents. Sometimes, for example, the worst assault was the last assault, and the women told us about the different contexts in which the violence occurred. We learned so much more about the emotional abuse and the control that was part of it. Yes. We learned about sexual abuse that was part of it. But in the end, it paid off. It was a really, really important, piece of work to do. And those figures that were produced from that research were really, really important because it was the first time, as I understand it, and I'm sure this is right, that kind of research had been done in Britain.
We started to use the term domestic violence because battering we thought was too crude. What women were experiencing was both physical and mental. But then we also realised, as women began to disclose more, that the violence could also be sexual. There wasn't really a strong awareness of it being sexual abuse as well until, a good few years. I mean, you're talking about maybe the early 80s before that was really recognised and also because, well, actually there was a test case and rape, the marriage was recognised.
A woman called June Gregg, she lived in Wester Hailes. She'd approached Women's Aid at one point because of the domestic abuse. She ended up killing him. She stabbed him, and obviously she was, put in prison, and her court case was coming up, and we campaigned and campaigned. She was visited at Cornton Vale prison. Her daughters obviously were taken into care. There was 3 daughters. And we did all-night vigils outside the court the night before the court case, and we had T-shirts with knifed, kicked, battered, slashed all around. And we did it all night with candles. That got amazing press. But when June was sentenced, we were all in court in the gallery, and the judge used us against June by saying he would not be pressurised by the Women's Aid organisation, and June got 6 years.
One of the issues in dealing with counsellors in the early days was that there was kind of a public perception that domestic abuse only happened in kind of certain social groups. So there was always a tendency for any particular local authority to say, well, they have it, but we don't have it, sort of thing. It's not a problem here. So there was much less awareness before the Zero Tolerance campaign, I think, of the spread throughout the whole social spectrum. In terms of kind of public representation, I suppose, well, there was just much less awareness of the whole issue. I mean, it was kind of a fight to get it on the agenda for all the services. And I mean, I think big difference from now, where you have, in a way, lots of other voluntary agencies jumping on the bandwagon of domestic abuse and lots of other agencies being involved in it, whereas at those those days it felt it was very much just Women's Aid that were doing it, and that we were really struggling to get a problem that existed acknowledged.
I think Women's Aid always had two really important elements. It had the providing services directly for women, but it also had a long-term aim of ending violence against women. And so therefore it needed to say what it was doing so that women could get access to services, but it also needed to highlight issues about domestic violence, not only for legal reform, but also with a view to changing attitudes and ending violence long term.
When we went through things before the 70s in our lives, or in the early 70s, whatever, there was no place to turn. And now there's a place to turn. There's several places to turn, and that makes a difference.
Scotland has been part of a worldwide movement, and that worldwide movement now has, from the UN numerically down, has accepted a feminist analysis, which was widely ridiculed, patronised and laughed at.
The way she said it, I don't know, but I suddenly realised, when she says to me, but you've got rights as well, and it was like a door opening, and I looked at her and I said, I know I have. But then I looked again and I went, actually she's right, I have. And it was like me seeing it for the very first time, or seeing it for the first time that I can change things, that there is things that I have got a right for this and I have got a right for that. And it was just a simple statement she said, but it always sticks in my mind. It was just like a door opening.
Used to being cold. I know it was warm one day, long, long time ago. Maybe there's a road that's not this hard. I'd rather not say why I couldn't stay home. Now I get paid never to be alone.